Hello ladies and gents, I'm back again and this is for specifically for Stick, who's kindly left me a comment in the description box. And because if you've been following any of my videos, you will see that I haven't got many comments, but Stick was kind enough to leave several comments, and he was asking specifically when I would actually make another video presentation, and this will go out to him. Also, I'd like to thank Paul Taylor for leaving me a comment as well, for John R for leaving me a comment, for Shane for kindly giving me or his viewers a shout out, so they'd come up and watch my videos, and I'm forever grateful for that. I've got 12 subscribers, so if you haven't subscribed, please take the time to subscribe when you can, because it helps the channel, and if you can leave a thumbs up, it'd be most appreciative. So do bear with me, because I'm by a train station, so there's trains going backwards and forwards, so I hope you can still hear me as these trains are passing by, because it's quite loud. So this video presentation is about Hermann Fegelein and Lady X. Hermann Fegelein was in the Hitler Circle. He was married to Gretel, which is Ava Braun's sister. She was 8 months pregnant at the time, because this was just days before the end of the war. And Hermann Fegelein was a person who was a social climber. He was a cavalryman, he was good on horses, and as a result he got into the Hitler inner circle. Now things had drastically changed by this time, so we're really at the last days of the war. We're April 26th, April 27th, April 28th, that kind of thing. And how can I put this? Hermann Fegelein had the opportunity. He was already outside of Berlin, but he had the opportunity to get back into Berlin. Now by this point, I'd say maybe April 26th, April 27th, he flew back into Berlin, because all the roads had already were now under Russian occupation. So from Rechlin, he flew from Rechlin in Germany to Gatow in Berlin. Gatow is a very famous airfield, and it was after the war. It was under French occupation. The French were in that area of Berlin. The French were invited at the end of the war, pretty much, because if you know your Berlin history, or European history, or history of World War II, you might be fascinated by, and the aftermath, especially the aftermath. There were three superpowers that were controlling Berlin. The Russians, they had the biggest chunk, which is the East Berlin. The Americans also had a big chunk, and Great Britain. And at the last moment, the French were invited to occupy Berlin. The Americans, naturally, and the Russians did not want to give any more territory to anybody else, so the British graciously gave France a chunk of Berlin for them to occupy. So anyway, Hermann Fegelein, he goes back to Berlin. Now he was in a district of Berlin that hadn't been touched. For some of you may not know this, others may not. Berlin wasn't completely destroyed. There were districts of Berlin that were untouched. Now when Hitler was driven around Berlin, he was driven around those districts that hadn't been touched. He did not want to see the districts of Berlin where the Allies had been bombing the city. So he wanted to avoid those areas. So his chauffeur would drive around those districts of Berlin that hadn't had any bombings whatsoever. So he wouldn't get to see it. So Hermann Fegelein, he actually stayed in Wilhelmsdorf. I think it's Wilhelmsdorf, which is Charlottenburg. It's a middle class area of Berlin, and the road that he stayed in was in Bleeps. I think it's called Bleeps. I've got it written down here because it's hard to pronounce. It's Bleibstreu. So Bleibtreu Strasse. Strasse means street. And it was about 4 miles from the Reichs-Chancellery. It was a luxury apartment that he was staying in. And he had a mistress whose name is lost to the history of time. We don't know her name. There were people that did know of her or heard of her, or there were rumours that were going around in the bunker that knew of this woman, but they didn't, or they may have briefly seen her. She was a woman who was blonde. There were traces of red. She had traces of red hair in her blonde, with her blonde hair. She was married to a Hungarian diplomat whose name I don't know, and she was given a job by Goebbels doing, I think, translations. She was doing translating within the radio. So, this woman who nobody really knows much about, but she was a mistress to Hermann Fegelein. So, and she was staying at this luxury apartment. Now, meanwhile, Hermann Fegelein wasn't really missed at the Hitler bunker. So he was getting back. He was in his apartment in Bleeps. I'll have to say this. I've got it written down here. It's called Bleibtreu Strasse. Now I went on Google Street View to actually have a look at this road, and I noticed there was a lot of new buildings that have been since World War II. The new buildings have been built, but as I followed the road, I could see there are the Altbau buildings, or old buildings, and the actual address is number 10 and number 11. So please, guys, don't go, because it's a private residence, don't go knocking on the door, and saying, oh, Hermann Fegelein used to stay here, Nobody wants to know, nobody cares. However, this is a very important observation that I'll eventually explain. Now, at the bunker, things were going, as you can imagine, the war was drawing to a close. There was a point where Hitler noticed that Fegelein didn't turn up to some of these meetings that he was supposed to have attended. So eventually Hitler did say, well, where is he? Yeah, and nobody knew where he was staying. So, but a Hitlerbefehl is something very, very serious. A Hitlerbefehl is a Hitler order, meaning it has to be carried out. If he gives the order, it's your problem to solve. He's given the order, that's it. And his order was, I want Fegelein in the bunker, in the Führer bunker. I want him here now. So Günther actually had his telephone number written down in a notebook, and he eventually volunteered it, and the Rotes Khmer was able to trace the telephone, the address of where the telephone is because they rang up Hermann Fegelein and Hermann Fegelein picked up the phone. Now, if you are a little bit sensible, you know, you would probably ask yourself, who is calling me at this particular time? You know, who's making this call? If he's got a phone line and this phone line is still working, think of it, is, you know, the Russians are literally a few blocks away. Him being on the Eastern Front, he will know the Russian guns. He will know the sounds of the Russian guns. And if anybody was to ring him up and he, there's two possibilities. One, they are ringing him up from the bunker. Two, somebody else knew of his telephone number and they were warning him, or it was an important call for him to actually pick up. And the third point I'd like to make, as it's just come into my mind, Fegelein is being influenced by the alcohol that he's drinking. He's drinking cognac and he's drunk. And it's almost like a Freudian slip. You know, when you do something, it's like a Freudian slip, and you think, I shouldn't have done that. You know, after he picked up the phone. But if he's under the influence of alcohol, he probably doesn't really care. You know, he's beyond reason. And there are some alcoholics or people that are heavy drinkers. You know, they're when they get drunk, they're merry, or they're really funny, and they're really engaging and charming. And then there are other drunks that are aggressive, argumentative, you know, violent even. And there is a possibility that Fegelein is the latter. So anyway, that phone call is now a warning. That phone call means that those that are in the bunker know where he's staying, because that telephone number that he gave to Göncha said that was an emergency only. But because of the influence of alcohol, this is actually making things a lot worse. Because if he wasn't under the influence of alcohol, he'd be able to reason all these things out. So there is a chap called Ruttenhuber. I think that's his name, Ruttenhuber, if I've got it written down here. Yeah, Rattenhuber. He was told by effectively Hitler to go and get Fegelein from his apartment. So they sent a Kubelwagen. Oh, let's see if I got it here. Yeah, Kubelwagen. Now, a Kubelwagen is a vehicle, a sort of an infantry personnel vehicle. So they'll have their soldiers in this Kubelwagen going through Berlin to try and pick up Fegelein. So it's a kind of like, you know, like a Keystone Cops kind of thing, you know, it's a sort of where the war's coming to an end. There are Russian soldiers in Berlin already fighting in the streets, and yet for some trivial reason they want to get Fegelein to come to the bunker to report to Hitler, because Hitler is starting to get agitated and angry, and he's saying, I want Fegelein. And it sort of gets, it's almost like a small little, you know, like a small little seed that just grows and gets bigger and bigger and bigger and worse and worse and worse as the situation unfolds. So they go to Fegelein's apartment. They see him is unshaven, he's drunk, he's in civilian clothing, and they want him to go get back into the bunker. Now, Fegelein is of a higher rank, and during this time, this plays a very important part because if you want to arrest someone or oblige them to actually come back to the bunker, you would want to send somebody who has the same rank or is higher rank than Fegelein was. And so he eventually agrees to come back to the Hitler bunker. And what they noticed there was this lady, this blonde woman who really didn't say that much, and she was there saying to the soldiers that were there, do they want any water with their cognac? So as she goes into the kitchen, they talk with Fegelein and trying to get him to agree to come back with them to the bunker. And then after a while, they just hear the tap running. And so one of the men goes into the kitchen and sees the taps running and the window open. But the woman has vanished. The lady's vanished. So he turns off the tap and closes the window. And that is sort of the end of that. So they take Fegelein back to their Hitler bunker. And they also take like a purse or a valise. I think it's called a valise, Valise. And so they take Fegelein back to the bunker, where he is in no fit state to give excuses for why he hasn't turned up. So they're treating it as desertion, because he hasn't reported back to the bunker when he should have. And so they go through this valise, and they see jewellery, they see money in different currencies, they see passports. And it's at this point that Martin Bormann, who's has the ear of Hitler and is going through this valise, and suddenly sees these passports, and one's a British passport, and that's when he starts to lose it, and he starts getting angry, and he has a go at the soldiers and Rutenhuber, saying to him, "Das Leck, die Weib," meaning the leak, and das Weib means that woman. Go and get the woman, So they drive back. They get into the Kubelwagen, drive back to that apartment, trying to look, and of course she's gone. The lady's vanished. That is the spy. She's a spy. What's happened is Hermann Fegelein has been, in their boudoir, has been shooting his mouth off, as saying what's been going on in the bunker, because Hitler was getting reports that were being broadcast by the BBC of what's been going on in the bunker, and he was like losing his mind. He's thinking, how is it that things are being leaked? How is it that they've got this close to find out exactly what's going on in the bunker? And the only way, by them putting two and two together, they see that Fegelein has been shooting his mouth off to this woman. This woman's reported it to her handler, whoever it is that she's in contact with. They've then transmitted that information to the UK, and from London they then use that as like a sort of a psyops, a kind of like black propaganda, or like a form of psychological warfare, where they're then transmitting the information back to the Germans, and Hitler saw that somebody was actually leaking this information, and he was able to, or at least Martin Bormann was able to, put two and two together and find out exactly who it was that was leaking this information, and it was getting through this woman to this woman, and she was the one that was actually giving this information to her handler, who was then transmitting it through one way or another, obviously telecommunications, back to London, and from London it was being transmitted back to the Germans. And I think Hitler at this time was exasperated. Himmler had betrayed him, Göring had betrayed him, or he perceived that he had betrayed him. His generals, he felt, was betraying him. Albert Speer didn't carry out the scorched earth policy, so he saw that as a betrayal, because he wanted Albert Speer to destroy all the factories, the electrical plants, bridges, anything that is that it's the structure of any city, where you have a system that keeps civilization moving. If this is all destroyed, I mean, you're starting again at what they call Stunde Null, meaning year zero, or you start for it. I mean, it's almost like the bringing civilization back to the Stone Age. That's what it is. And Hitler wanted Albert Speer to do this, and Albert Speer refused. He said, "No, I'm not going to do it." So Hitler saw this as a betrayal. And then, of course, the Russians are on the doorstep, literally on the doorstep. They're in the city now, blocks away from where he is, where the Hitler Chancellery is, and because he can tell and he can hear the artillery fire. So who does he take it out on? Hermann Fegelein. So Hermann Fegelein, by this point, he's being interrogated because Müller, who's the head of the Gestapo, is sobering him up. So you can imagine, by taking him in a cellar, you'd think you can sober somebody up in about 12 hours, just by keeping the bottle away from him. But the Gestapo, for their own means of sobering somebody up, so they sober him up. They have this court-martial. He's court-martialed. His epaulets are torn from his shoulders, so he's reduced to a private, effectively, and then they say, we're going to execute you. So they eventually shoot him. Now this is on April the 28th. April the 28th. 2 days before Hitler commits suicide himself. So what Hitler's doing, because a Hitler Befehl is a Hitler order. That means it must be carried out. And when the war criminals at the Nuremberg trials, when they would say, look, we had to carry out the order. Orders is orders, and you will have heard this oftentimes before. And the Germans are being sort of ridiculed for it, but they swore an oath to Hitler. That's why a Hitler Befehl, it had to be carried out, whatever, it had to be carried out. So this lady, I'm going to read a passage from the book The Bunker by James P. O'Donnell. This is where it comes from, because there isn't any other source where they talk about this spy who was able to penetrate the Hitler bunker. This is the only source that I get it from, and what's so unique about this particular book is a lot of the people that were in the Hitler bunker were still alive at the time. This book was published in 1978, so a lot of those that had survived the war and survived the bunker were able to tell the story about who this lady actually was. So I'm going to read a little passage from the book, and it goes like this. Those of us working in the psychological warfare branch never knew too much about this mystery woman. Our shop code number for her was Marta O'Hara. She was operating in Berlin, had intimate contacts in the high SS circles, including the Hitler entourage. We used her inside material of Soldatensender Calais, our effort in the field of black propaganda. But when our troops and military intelligence people got to Berlin in 1945, they found out our most successful lady agent had vanished. The cream of the jest is that she was not English, she was Irish. She should have got the Victoria Cross. Someday she probably will. This is by Richard Crossman, British MP and journalist, who in 1955 had this conversation with the author. This is the mystery woman. Now, when I think of Fegelein, I think of the difficulty, or the confusion. What was going through Fegelein's mind? He had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to get away. First from Rechlin. I say Rechlin because it is an airfield in Berlin where they take a plane to fly into. I got my words tangled. From Rechlin, he flew from that airfield to Gatow, which is in Berlin. He was an officer to charter to get a plane. He couldn't get his own plane, but he had the rank where he had the opportunity to get a plane. Why did he go back to Berlin? You know, he knew that the war was winding down. He knew it was coming to an end. He knew if the Russians got hold of him, he'd probably be shot. Why did he go to Berlin? There had to be a reason for him to go back to Berlin. It could have been for his mistress. But so he went back to Berlin. He went back to his apartment. He stayed at his apartment. That telephone was like either it was because somebody was trying to contact him, but even then, you know, he could have made arrangements to have a signal with that phone that he had. Say ring 3 times or ring 5 times, and then I know it's you. But then he picked up the phone, so he gave himself away, and at that point he could have got away. Why didn't he? He must have known. Certainly the woman must have known. Clearly, you know, unless she was in the same state as he was. But it didn't look as though she was. So he had an opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. Now this reminds me of Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't know if you know the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing. She had the means to get away. When she was, when they were looking for her, or at least where she wasn't arrested, there was opportunities for her to get away. She could have slipped over the Mexican border. She had money. She had passports. She could speak a foreign language. You know, she could speak French. Why did she do? Why were they vacillating? Why was Hermann Fegelein vacillating? Going through this, when I read this chapter, when I was going through this story, trying to figure out what was it that made him go back to Berlin. Now, he'd been on the Eastern Front. He knew what the Russian guns sound like. He knows how close the Russians are. Why didn't he leave? I cannot understand it. It's the same with this lady, this Mata O'Hara. What was it about her that made her stay in Berlin that late, when she knew that the war was coming to an end? Either she was looking for more information that she could report to London, and the only way she could do that was through Fegelein. So she was hanging around, and this is why I couldn't understand. Plus, when she escaped, it can't be so easy for her. If she got out through the kitchen window, how high was the kitchen window to the ground floor? You know, what was she wearing? Did she have any money with her at the time? We don't know. She simply vanished. She got out of the kitchen window, must have lowered herself somehow to the ground and got away. And she knew how vulnerable she was because the Russians were raping all the women. So clearly she must have gone to a handler or somebody that could help her. And then, of course, that was the end of the story pretty much, because we never knew of her. And it's sort of, you know, when I watch James Bond, and I think of James Bond, and I think he was a terrible spy. Why was he a terrible spy? Because everybody knew his name. With this woman, we don't know her name. We don't know who she was. We don't know if she got away. We don't know anything. All we know is she was the one that was actually able to get information from Fegelein and report it to London. And she was brilliant at her job. And to this day, we don't know who she is. And that should be for any spy. If you're a spy, you don't want to be caught. You don't want anyone to know you are a spy, and you want to be able to get away as soon as you can if your cover's blown. So Kim Philby, for example, his cover was blown and he defected to the Soviet Union. Whereas with this lady, we don't know anything about her other than she's the lady who vanished. And that's the story I want to tell. I would say, I would call her Lady X, because that's the only name I can give her. And in all the books that I've read on the bunker and everything that I've, the thinking of about the behaviours of the those that were in the bunker and those that had survived the bunker, which is fascinating in and of itself. This is the most mysterious story of the whole bunker saga. More interesting and mysterious than, did Hitler die? Did he escape to Argentina? Hitler never escaped. He died there in the bunker. He took his own life. He shot himself through the temple as he bit into a cyanide capsule, and that was the end of it. But the lady who vanished is more fascinating because we know so little about this woman than the death of Adolf Hitler at the end of the war. So I'm going to conclude it there. I'm going to thank Stick and Paul Taylor and John R and Shane for giving me a shout out and writing those comments for me, because it's for that reason that I've done this YouTube presentation. So I'm going to leave it there. So auf Wiedersehen.